The last time Ramses followed Moses, he closed the Red Sea on him. So I feel a little like Pharaoh Ramses. Um, the problem with speaking after Edwin is that he's already said what all of us want to say. So either we say something different or we say it differently. But the good news in all this is if learning is indeed lifelong, then I'm guessing we need lifelong teaching as well. So you guys will probably have jobs much longer than we will. I'll start by talking about 3 or 4 stories. I drove in and there was this young boy at the gate, and he saw me in my CRV in jeans and red sunglasses with music blasting, and he said, "Sir, which college are you from?" So I said, "Are you trained to say that, or you're just saying that to make me feel happy?" But that was a positive sort of human skill-related experience. Cut to, I go into the washroom and I'm standing next to the wash basin, and this young boy opens the door and bangs straight into me as I was exiting and didn't say anything at all. I said, and the older I get, the more rude I get. And I said, the least you can do is apologize. Just looked at me and just carried on. Negative human interaction. Thereafter, standing outside the auditorium, I was waiting because the previous session was on. And instead of calling Amit, I thought I'll just sit back and look at my notes again. And there was another student who offered me a chair, which had for some reason a candle stuck to it. I said, "Thank you for the chair, I'll take it without the candle." And he didn't say anything. So again, some sort of a negative reaction. The reason I'm starting with all these stories is that I'm hoping and guessing that there's one thing that robots cannot do is take away from human skill. And I think our entire education system is geared to making us mimic robots or making us better than robots. If you look at, and I know we're talking more about higher education, but if you look at even primary education in India today, we are always competing against someone else. I've been a sportsman all my life. We are taught to compete against yourself, get better than yourself. Our entire education system, from primary to secondary to higher education, is to be the best amongst everyone else. It's like my grandfather who used to say my uncle used to come last or first in the fat boys race. Now, today that would be considered racist and sexist, etc. But that's the point, right? Are you trying to be the best amongst the average, or are you trying to be the best amongst, the best? How about trying to be better than yourself? How about the curriculum changing to award prizes for the most improved student or for the most improved performance? One of the perquisites of my job is that I get to meet the most famous sportsmen in the world. Carl Lewis used to always say, "I always run for time and never for gold." Because I could win gold depending on the field in a time that, I'm not happy about. But if I set a particular time, which is me versus that time, me versus a better version of myself, then almost always, not only when I win gold, but I probably will break some record as well. So I think our entire education, right from primary school, where, there are, Moses talked about, Edwin talked about our population, which is an asset, and he said, use the word blessed. There are more students than there are seats, and therefore, I remember my daughter going into primary school in Delhi, and she was playing around, and there's this teacher comes in and looks at her, observes her for 5 minutes and says, "Yeah, I think we can take her." I want to ask, even as parents, I don't understand my child, despite having her with me all day, in 5 minutes, how can you tell? And we're always competing in India. We're competing for that job, for that college education. Hell, we even compete, to get married and then to get promoted and to get sort of ahead in life and get a better car, bigger house. You're holidaying in Goa, I will go to the Cayman Islands, or I'll go to the Bahamas. Your point of reference is external. It is always with someone else. How about making the point of reference internal? How about improving yourself? No matter how good you are, there is always someone better than you. Hopefully there are people who are not as good as you. But are you better today than you were yesterday? Will you be better tomorrow than you are today? I think that is a critical element in terms of our education system, where it is more learning by rote and not by doing. Students have to be encouraged to learn by doing, which is why new age universities like, Jindal, Ashoka, set up by Pramod Sinha, I think, Ashoka and a couple of other people are trying to do that. I'm still doubtful in my mind in terms of the employability of people graduating from there. My nephew is graduating from Jindal in liberal arts. I wanted to ask him, what is liberal arts? Like Srinivas's brother sort of failed to provide him with a satisfactory explanation on big data, he sort of failed to provide me an explanation of what is liberal arts. Because subsequently he wants to apply to E&Y for a job, and he has absolutely nothing that qualifies him to even be considered there. So we are producing 52,000 doctors a year. These are government numbers from about 2 years ago. 52,000. You'd think for a nation of 1.3 billion, that is abysmally low. About 3.5 lakh MBAs and 1.5 million engineers. Right? Isn't it prescient that 3 idiots were shot in this beautiful campus about following your heart and not necessarily becoming an engineer? So what will 1.5 million engineers do? Because that same engineer not only has to build a great dam that survives pressures, but also is environmentally friendly. Because 3 trends, to my mind, will dominate business going ahead. One is purpose, the other is wellness, and the third is sustainability. Millennials or Gen Z or the butterfly generation or whatever you want to call them are more concerned with brands and companies that have a purpose beyond just commercial gain, beyond just making money, beyond just chasing volume and market share. Wellness, whether it is personal for the company or for your consumers or stakeholders, will dominate across all fields. And sustainability. I think our generation is the one that has really messed up the environment in terms of sustainability, in terms of governance, in terms of compliance, in terms of business environment. I mean, you see the scams that are unfolding. I mean, all that will dominate. I'm not sure how robots can handle that. I'm sure there will be a way to find that out, but the nature of human skills that is required to deal with these issues will have to change. I mean, I see, I went to an IIM, and I'm not going to take the name, very recently to recruit, our quota was 2 graduates. I interviewed 72 students. And at the end of the day, I hired only 1 because we had committed to that institute that we will take at least 1 student from your institute. It's one of the IIMs, so nothing wrong with that. All the students that I interviewed were all qualified, but they were not educated. And the problem with business today is that no one has any patience. We all expect our new entrants to hit the ground running. It's not their fault. From primary education to secondary to higher, and I dare say to the breeding and bringing up that they face at home, nothing has prepared them for the real world. And the cost of not being prepared today is significantly higher than during our time. Now that is the situation in terms of our education system. Now, I mean, Edwin talked about business. The scale up at business is dramatic today. I read today that Apple has become the first $1 trillion market capitalization company in the world. I also read that a company called Saudi Aramco, when it goes public in a few days or a few weeks, will actually become more than $1 trillion. I mean, these numbers were unimaginable. You have young tech entrepreneurs, you have young startup guys who are becoming millionaires and billionaires overnight. Where they lack is in human skill. That is why many years ago, Sergey Brin and Larry Page got an Eric Schmidt to run the company, a far older, far more seasoned person. That is why Bill Gates stepped aside and said to Steve Ballmer, you run the company. A guy like Steve Jobs, a person like him comes along only once in a generation, was a great design thinker, a great visionary, one of the few people who could actually tell what a consumer wants without the consumer even knowing it. But he wasn't such a great guy at running the company. So the skill sets that are required are different depending on what you're involved in. My favorite example is of MS Dhoni. He's never been the greatest batsman in the team. He doesn't bowl. Technically, he's not even the best wicketkeeper. And some people say Ridhiman Saha is a better wicketkeeper. But the X factor that he brings or brought to the entire process, whether it's in terms of leadership or determining which resource is best for what, is something that no amount of training or talent can teach. I believe that through history, Leadership has always mattered, and I believe even going ahead it will matter. More so in the future, because we are living on mobile phones, we're living through technology, human interactions are dramatically decreasing. Emotional intelligence is a skill that is declining. And therefore, the role of the boss today, the role of the leader today, will be even more to handle breakdowns, to handle loneliness, to handle problems caused by technology and lower human interaction. People are losing the skill set to talk. I mean, they do talk. They talk on Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp and Instagram. And the only way I know what my daughter, she studies in the US, what she's doing is through her Instagram stories. And this generation eschews face-to-face contact. They actually don't like face-to-face contact. And they say, hey, great talking to you, but we didn't talk. Right? And they will talk to multiple people at the same time on their devices. And you are the person who is in charge of leading and developing that skill set. And I promise you, one great experience in my book is rated superior to an overall average experience. Now, if I tell you, what is your experience? Do you love Book My Show? Do you love Make My Trip? Do you love Amazon? Do you love Flipkart? I mean, the chances are that you don't have a deep emotional relationship with any of these app-driven businesses. However, last week I walked into the ITC Maurya Sheraton where we were staying for a sales review, and there's this young lady at the reception just walks straight towards me and say, "Good evening, Mr. Sheikhawat, how are you?" And it knocked my socks off. I said, "How did you recognize me? I mean, I don't stay that frequently at that hotel." In this case, she said, "Sir, I was a flight attendant with Kingfisher Airlines and I've flown you many times." The first thing I asked was, "Did you get all your salaries?" She said no, but she says, "At the ITC, we are trained to expect certain guests at a certain point in time, and you're a Club ITC Platinum member, etc." Whatever the reason. The reason was that, the experience was that she walked straight up to me as I was walking in and called me out by name. And today I'm telling this story in front of 250 people, right? There is a restaurant, and Edwin has heard me say this before. In Delhi, there is a restaurant called Kakeda Hotel, which serves the best brain curry that I've ever eaten. My grandfather used to eat there, my father has eaten there, I've eaten there, my daughter's eaten there. It's over 100 years old. The brain curry still tastes exactly as it did when I was 7 years old. To me, that kind of an experience, or that kind of consistency of experience, cannot be replicated by robotics. So my submission is, there will always be space for human skills. Human skills have to be upgraded, obviously, to take charge and to make sort of sense and be relevant to today's business. And how is business changing? I mean, apart from business at this speed of thought or scaling up, at lightning speed, very importantly, there is two-way communication between consumers and the CEO today. I was reading an article yesterday, largely related to food and growth of sort of QSR chains, KFC, McDonald's, Domino's, etc., where the CEO, and some of them are friends of mine, personally respond to consumer complaints on Twitter. I mean, people consume more, people complain more about QSRs because, the experience is immediately apparent. But CEOs have taken charge themselves. And therefore, today, there is two-way communication. Many years ago, I remember I bought a Gillette shaving gel which didn't function, and I didn't know what to do. At the time, they were still imported. I sent it back to the company and never got a response. I was very disappointed. Today, I can just get on their Facebook site or find out who's the CEO and send him a message on Twitter, and this all gets played out in the public eye. Now, when this generation, our generation, retires and rides off into the sunset, and I have a point on that, the younger generation that will be handling this, how would they react? Right? Young sportsmen have forever, or someone like Donald Trump has forever changed the acceptable standards of behavior in public. It's happening in India as well. By the way, the guys who voted for him love him. And I've just returned from the US and they say that he's going to get a second term. Because he's doing everything he said he would. And as a marketer, I can't be subject, I have to be objective about it. There's the rise of the right wing across the world. So apart from robotics, even geopolitics impacts business perhaps as much, if not more. We shouldn't forget to include that in 4.0. Look at what's happening in Turkey, Brexit, France with Marine Le Pen, the US, India. the Philippines. I mean, that will determine businesses and the future of employment to a large extent as well. I believe yesterday or day before, Trump has told Congress, including the Democrats, that if you don't build the wall, I will shut down the government. Now that's the reality. Right or wrong, it is the reality. I'm not sure how or maybe Trump is a robot, one doesn't know. What is needed is, I think, an entire overhaul of the education system. You know, I was once on a flight with Kapil Sibal, and he was then education minister, and we got talking, and he said, do you know, Mr. Sheikhawat, we need 17,000 new universities. This conversation is about 10 years ago. So I said, Mr. Sibal, with due respect, you've been part of a party that has ruled this country for 60 odd years. What has stopped you from sort of proceeding on those lines? He said, oh, you don't understand, you know, it requires bill approvals, funding, etc. But I promise you, we are sitting on a ticking time bomb. You are producing graduates by the millions. They will simply not get jobs. I'm not suggesting that we'll have a Tiananmen Square or something like the breakup of the former Soviet Union, but it is a ticking time bomb when you have graduates who don't have jobs, who are unemployed. What do you think will happen? Crime, terrorism, drug abuse, social unrest. We will rip apart the social fabric. Couple this with the fact that people are today living and working in cities far removed from where they were born, without the social support of, let's say, family systems and friends. So we're sitting on a ticking time bomb, and you know, we really need to wake up and smell the beer, if not the coffee, and dramatically overhaul the education system. And frankly, you know, my sympathies with all of you here, because you're receiving a near finished product. The problem is, for instance, with helicopter parents. You know, I tell parents, always prepare your child for the road. Don't prepare the damn road for your child. My daughter studies 15,000 miles away on the other end of the world. I can't be worrying what she's doing on a daily basis. I can just hope that we gave her a strong set of values and the best education that my money can provide. But that is not necessarily the case with people far less fortunate and privileged than many, or if not most of us are. You know, like Edwin said, you're not interested in studying, just study hard. And today you have things like ADHD, dyslexia, you know, all sorts of other learning disabilities. In the old days, there was no knowledge and no awareness of that. They would just say, "Ladka padhta nahi hai, ladki nalayak hai, do thappad maro, padhna shuru ho jayega." That's how we all were treated, right? If you're sort of writing with your left hand, mar karke right hand se sikha do. My daughter's left-handed, by the way. Today you say, oh, you know, left-handed people means right brain, more creative. All that is there. And, you know, I've had to, by the way, dramatically change my speech because Edwin sort of, you know, said everything that I had to. So I'm just trying to give a different perspective in terms of what is needed. I would recommend all of you, I follow a motivational speaker called Jay Shetty, Indian origin guy. He's really good. He's very simple, and there's this particular video where he is talking to a student, to a whole batch of students who are graduating in terms of future careers on things like clean energy and, you know, environment sustainability. I'm sure most of you have seen that video. If you haven't, I would urge that you do. There is a book that I'm reading called The Future of Leadership, The Rise of Automation, Robotics and Artificial Intelligence by a lady called Bridget Tasha Hyacinth, who's an African-American woman who was sacked from her job because she wasn't very clued into technology, and she's written a book on it. You know, she's gone and reinvented herself. It's really inspiring. I'm halfway through that. There's a lot in there. In the latest issue of Business World, Sanjeev Anand, who's the CEO of Cedar Consulting, has written a lovely article on robotics and how human skills need to be upgraded, and how we need to reinvent and retool and reimagine ourselves to stay relevant. I keep telling my people that today you could find someone 10 years younger than me, probably with 80, 85, 90% of the skill sets that I hopefully have at half my cost. It's the whole Sony TV, Samsung TV example, right? The Samsung, in fact, today the AMOLED display is probably better than the Sony's, but let's say until 5 years ago, the Samsung TV is 95% as good as a Sony at 40% cheaper price. Is it any wonder that Sony is a much smaller brand in India than Samsung? Or even more recently, I'm in the market for a new mobile phone. My current phone is 5 years old and hangs, all the time. And I was doing some research, and my daughter sent me a whole sort of list of features between something called the OnePlus 5T versus the Samsung Galaxy S9. Exactly the same features, exactly. The only difference is the OnePlus NT is 20,000 rupees cheaper than the Samsung. Now, in my mind, I've always had a Samsung phone. I'm still trying to debate whether I would still pay the 20,000 just for seeing the sanctity or comfort of the logo Samsung written in there, but I guarantee you, 9 out of 10 people will jump ship to OnePlus NT, which I believe has become the largest selling smartphone in India for the last quarter. So that is what's going to happen. There will always be someone lighter, cheaper, faster, slimmer. But as long as you continuously reinvent yourself and do not compete with anyone else, compete with yourself. Yes, robotics will happen. Yes, big data, cryptocurrency, blockchain, automation, artificial intelligence, everything will happen. Incidentally, Edwin, maybe I should borrow your robot. I sacked my maid as well. So maybe I need to take that up as well. All this will happen, but as he said in 1966, Time magazine had already predicted all this to happen. And I'm going to say something which you guys are not going to like. Education in this country, like everything else, has become a business. And we've all been guilty of being part of that business without necessarily bothering about the output that we have produced. Because it was convenient. It worked. There was demand at the user end for the products of this business. You know what? Increasingly, it will not happen. Thank you very much. And remember, despite all this, you can always have a cold glass of beer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samar. I don't know whether you guys